Brian Mackerer, thank you for joining us. Great to have you on the
My,
podcast.
my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we've got Brian as a guest. We've got Jeet Mukherjee. Jeet is the Chief Strategy Officer at Holden Advisors. And we've got a couple topics for today. I think our best starting place is to have you. So Brian is the VP of North America at Kraft. It'd be great to have you just tell us a little bit about what Kraft does and what your role is there, and we can kind of jump from that point.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. I joined Kraft almost 5 years ago, pre-Series A. So I joined to really build out the go-to-market team. So I led our initial strategic engagements and helped raise Series A funding. And then we had some additional partnerships that I led, and then we went into Series B. I was employee 6 in the US. So now I think we're just north of 100. So I've had the opportunity to build the whole go-to-market team from the ground up. So the CS team, first CS hire, the first SE hire, first marketing hire, first BDR hire, first AE hire. So
Wow.
I've worn a lot of hats. And so now, I lead part of the team that in North America. So we have AEs, BDRs, SEs under me. So
We've got a lot of things that
uh,
we can pick your brain about
Yeah,
here.
and to answer your second question, so Craft is a supply chain due diligence platform, software platform. We sell through three really channels. One is to the government, one is through a partnership channel, primarily through Deloitte at this point, and the second one is direct to end clients.
Very cool. And then how do you and Jeet know each other?
Jeet and I go way back when I was at Dun& Bradstreet, where I was prior to Kraft, and I spent 15 years there. I was leading a team that was selling into Ingram Micro, and Jeet was a leader over at Ingram Micro, and he was my buyer.
Nice.
He's leaving out the part that I was one of his worst customers. I made his life miserable.
I wouldn't say one of, I would say the worst, if it's fair.
I'm glad I asked that question.
Well, if he was one of my worst customers, I wouldn't be here today. So we became friends and
Yes.
just a thought leader in Jeet. So yeah, he's great.
All right. Well, it's great to have you on. I mean, these podcast episodes, we cover a lot of different things around value, sales, pricing, and there were a lot of things in kind of your experience over the years that we thought it would be great to kind of pick your brain about. And perhaps we start with value-based pricing, like overall approaches that you've seen work in software, kind of
Mhm.
your take on that in the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's a big question there,
Yeah.
Tracy. So thanks for starting there. I'll use two different pieces or two different stories to jump into it. One is when I was at D&B, we were a monopoly basically in terms of our brand, and so everyone needed to buy D&B, and so that was we leveraged our brand a lot on pricing, so it enabled us to get into meetings, but also how we pushed customers to buy was based on our brand, to be honest, and it was unfair. Uh, we I'll tell one quick story, which is kind of funny. We were selling, I led the team that managed the Apple account. So we were talking to Apple about the value of our pricing and our services. So as we are going through the sales process, we had gone through and we were working with the retail group and sales operations group. And we got to a point where we had done some value engineering and came back to them with I think it was a 28x ROI and some crazy number, but the cost was $4 million. And they came back to me and said, well, that's great, Brian, but for $4 million, I can go open an Apple store in Turkey and it's going to generate $90 million and you're going to save me one. So no, thank you. So that was an interesting one. We've changed and pivoted now at my current company at Kraft is we're more of a SaaS module play. So we do a lot of discovery on which modules are going to drive value to that customer. And so we either focus on which of those modules are driving value or which of them don't. So we disqualify the modules that aren't going to add value. And then our pricing is going to be based on the modules that do add value. That seems to be a better model that we've seen work at Kraft.
Brian, you bring up a really important philosophy or action that we have when we try to put value-based pricing into the market. We believe in modulating that value based on the customer that's about to get it. So not all customers are the same. We know that, right? Some customers are going to use your product differently. Some are going to get incrementally a lot more value than others. So if you're not going to get a lot of value, why would you force them to pay for something that you're pretending that you're going to get a lot of value?
That's right.
That value is really a function of that customer, not the function of the product or the company selling that product. And we often see that as a mistake that people make, our clients make, is because they've created a great product. D&B is a great example. They've created a great product and they've got to attach a number to that product as far as value goes. But that
Yeah.
may not be the same. Like Ingram, we use that product very, very, we use it extensively. And we used every portion of it. So we extracted a lot of value from it. We built a lot of applications off of it. So I feel like we got a lot out of it. Somebody else may not. Somebody may just be looking at the DUNS number and just getting addresses off of it, and that's it. They're not using anything else. That's part of it. And it should be a different level of pricing based on the use and based on that value that you're actually getting from the customer.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about the Ingram micro use case. And let's take 1 minute to double click into that, because I think it's really important. And it was important for me in my career working with Jeet and the team. And we had a very good relationship, and we had an open, transparent relationship. And Jeet was open with me in terms of his challenges selling up in terms of the value of D&B, but also getting budget. And it was really based around the business model of Ingram. So he came to me and said, Brian, I appreciate the value that you're driving at Ingram, but our margins are 2.1% at best, and maybe down to 1%. So you need to look at your price model to accommodate our model. And so it was really aligning our expectations with the Ingram margin and then coming to an agreement. So I thought that was really important for me to understand selling into a customer that was price sensitive based on margins.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because most of the time, when we see clients do value-based pricing, they focus on the revenue piece of it, and sometimes you really do need to look at the profit or the profit dollar piece, because a company can have huge amounts of revenue scale, but profitability-wise, they're more of a Fortune 1000 company rather than a Fortune 10 or Fortune 50 company. So it is an interesting nuance that some of our clients kind of forget as they're trying to implement value-based pricing or some type of a return on their products and services. But Brian, I'm curious, like one of the things that I have always appreciated about you and your sales strategy is really how you're able to build relationships, right? And co-create with your client base. Because obviously we've done events together, we've done a bunch of stuff together, and I've met other customers of yours and at different places. And you've always had this ability to build close relationships and have that co-creation type of relationship with your customers. I feel like when salespeople are able to get to that level of a relationship, it kind of cuts through the noise of a typical sort of sales environment. If we look at a typical sales environment, and let's just generalize and say a used car salesman, use the analogy, it's very transactional. It's very sort of meet in the middle, this number versus that number. But if you go to the other extreme of co-creation with your customer, there is this level of trust, there's a level of relationship that you can do a lot more of the give and the take that's beneficial on both sides. I'm curious to kind of understand your sort of thoughts and strategy and kind of building that type of a customer base.
Yeah. It's funny. I get asked sometimes from leadership at different companies about my style, and it's always relationship based. And it's relationship based in the context that I always am the biggest advocate for my customer. So not only in your case at Ingram, for Ingram, and so I wanted to protect and support Ingram's goals, but also Jeet. And so my goal was to understand what was important to Jeet personally. So businesses are typically going to buy because of business value, organizational value, or personal value. So I was always looking at how, and I like people, so that I like building relationships. It makes my job more fun. But I always try to build that relationship. And to your point, Jeet, about co-creating, that's the important thing for me is I want to make them successful personally, but also the company. The relationship enabled the co-creation to happen. So that's what's most important to me, because that's when you get into what's really driving their goals and their needs. So yeah, that's just the kind of my DNA is trying to get to that level of comfort in that relationship with the client.
That's great. How do you kind of filter out? Because obviously there's a lot of different types of people, different types of organization, not just people at that point. How do you kind of filter out the folks that you really, they're price buyers in our terminology, right? Or some type of a buyer that's just not productive.
Oh man, that's a really good question. It's really, really hard, to be honest, um, because their job, first of all, their job is to procure something. So their job is to buy something.
Yeah.
So I know that at the end they need to buy something. Hopefully it's from me. But that one's really difficult, G, because they're keeping you at arm's length and they don't give a lot in terms of their own personal goals. It's just a lot of discovery and a lot of work. So asking organizational questions, but then reading between the lines. So, if you buy this, what does it mean for, for your team? Oh, we can do this. Okay. If your team does that, what is the ultimate outcome for you and your, oh, but that means I can do this. Okay. So then it just takes a lot more discovery. And it's not as fun, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
I think it's important that what you just laid out, because we kind of teach this as well, is you've got the relationship side, but you also have to have the knowledge of the business, and that needs to come together to be able to serve all those different types of buyers. Because what we see often, and I used to laugh at Ingram, is a lot of the folks would be like, "Oh yeah, I know my customers so well. I got invited to their kids' bar mitzvah and things like that," and they use that as a barometer for how well they know their business. And it's like it's not. You've got the relationship or the personal side down, but you also have to know their business, understand how they make money in order to put those together to be able to have the right type of transactional environment for that's best for both parties, and that's the piece a lot of young salespeople I think miss out on.
I think that's 100% correct. Is you need to do your homework about that company and their business and their challenges, what's in the news, if they're public, in the 10K, what's on social media, and understand how they sell, why they sell, what are their differentiators, what are their challenges. And so that takes a lot of time, and that's just part of the blocking and tackling of getting to know that client. The other piece I'd say, which maybe go to your first question, is what I try to do is no one wants to be a first mover, or typically they don't want to be a first mover. They want to be a fast follower. So what I always try to do is have a catalog of prospects or clients that have done something with me, and then I can share that success with the client. So in any story or any conversation, if they say, "Oh, we're doing this," I say, "Unbelievable. T-Mobile is doing the exact same thing, and here's what we did for them." And that brings down their guard a little bit, and they have comfort, and then you have credibility. So I think that's really important. I also think it's important to have not only a knowledge of the customer, but the industry as well, because then you're a thought leader and you're a partner as opposed to just trying to sell something. So having that broad, kind of pulling back or opening the aperture a little bit more on the industry is pretty important, I think.
You shared about Apple in the beginning, that story. Like, I would imagine just over the years, you've seen some mistakes people make in trying to do value-based selling or price based on value. Are there other things that stand out to you of like, okay, this was something I witnessed, this really didn't work, and here's what people learned from it?
I have another funny Apple story. I don't know if it was a lesson I learned, but maybe it's just a funny story. So we were selling to Apple. We had gone around and done discovery and done really thorough discovery and had buy-in from, I think it was like 18 groups across Apple. So the finance group and operations and developer relations and marketing and sales, retail. And so we finally were meeting the sales finance lead, and he actually just got appointed the CFO of Apple. So we sit in this long executive boardroom at Apple. No one's talking. There's one open chair. Boardroom doors are closed. We're just waiting. Doors open. Sales finance lead comes in, sits down, and we begin the meeting. No small talk, just jump right into the meeting. And the sales operations lead at Apple says, "Okay, here's what we're looking at buying from D&B. It's $3 million or $4 million and blah, blah." And he says, "Okay, and you've done the due diligence, and what are we buying?" And we went through a quick song and dance and dog and pony show. He goes, "Okay, I think we're good here. Yeah, let's do it." Like, oh, okay. And we left, went across the street, outside of Apple's headquarters. There's a bar, ordered 3 beers, grabbed the beer, phone ring, bad news. He thought and the Apple guy says, "I hope you're not ordering beers right now." Yes, we are. So the issue was he thought the entire contract was $3 million or $4 million. He didn't realize it was $3 or $4 million incremental.
Oh,
So the lesson there was, I mean, you have to, until there's pen on paper, understanding the entire buying process and making sure every single party knows what steps are going on in the process and who's responsible for what. That is a key learning that I learned that day. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
I really like that. That's pretty good. I could picture it in my head. I have one, Tracy, to answer your question. And for us, it's really about, I think salespeople do a really good job of training their customers to behave a certain way, and the customers do a good job of training salespeople and organizations to behave a certain way. So I think it goes both ways of how we train each other. Like salespeople train customers to ask for discounts, get discounts, and create a negotiation scenario where the customer may not even have realized that they could negotiate, but they kind of create that environment right off the get-go by language they use, words they use, and things like that. And customers do the same thing by demanding procurement, going through the process and all that, right? But what's interesting to me is we grew up in this world where we've always said to ourselves, the customer's always right. And we do these sort of actions that sometimes are not fiscally responsible for the company to do these actions, but we do it because we think we're trying to make the customer happy. We're a customer-centric company. We have to make the customer happy. And we sometimes do these things, especially as a young salesperson. They don't know any better sometimes, and they want to make the customer happy, and they pull levers they shouldn't be pulling. And I had a conversation with a friend one time where he talked about cutting his customers down by 50% and doubling his profits. And he did that over a course of a couple of years. And he was talking about how engaged his employees were after making the action. He talked about the benefits to his company. Luckily, his company is not valued on scale, right? So that's the big sort of difference. But the doubling of his profitability and making it where every employee feels loved, and it all started with walking away from bad customers. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there, where not every quality of revenue is something that's important. Not every dollar is equal. And when you have customers that are undisciplined, they're customers that don't behave appropriately, to create a culture of positivity, it's okay to walk away from some of this revenue that's out there. And I think that's a very important lesson.
Yeah, that's a good lesson. One other one I thought about, Tracy, is, and you talked about us train our customers and vice versa, and that happened a lot at D&B, and it happens at Craft less so. At D&B, we knew that as we got later in the quarter, procurement was going to start asking for bigger and bigger discounts. And so the percentage of our revenue that was lost as we got closer to end of quarter, because D&B got really greedy at the end of, and desperate at the end of quarters, that we knew if we got closer to that June 30th or September 30th timeline, customers were going to ask for a discount and we would concede because we needed the revenue in. So working back from that end of quarter, end of month, and the fiscal year timeline and trying to get a deal done way earlier will save, I mean, I don't know the number. It's got to be 10, 20, 30% of your revenue if you can get deals done before the last week of the month, because you won't be as desperate to get that deal done. And the pricing pressure will be way less.
Yeah, that's a good one, Brian. One of the thing that I'm curious about is your data, being a data services company versus being a product company. Data services, obviously, your incremental cost is really low, right? So when you go into a sales conversation or negotiations, how do you handle that? Because you on paper, you could say that you have 90% margin with some of these data services. Not to say D&B had 90%, so we don't have to make it company specific, but you have a little bit more confidence that says, hey, I have a lot of room to move around in order to close this whale that's in front of me, right? How do you think about cost relative to negotiation going in, especially when you have like data services as a product?
It's a good question. So it was a little bit different at D&B than it is at Craft. At D&B, we knew we had a ton of wiggle room in terms of what margin we were going. I rarely thought about cost, to be honest, because we had that margin built in. I knew whatever price the price calculator spit out or the deal desk team spit out, I knew I had 20% wiggle room right off the bat without even blinking an eye. I could get approval. And I knew if I needed to go down to 50%, I could probably get it depending on the deal. If I said, oh, I'm going to get a multi-year deal, or I'll add in some concession. So I knew I had a wiggle room. Craft is a little bit different. Our margins are higher on the software side, but we don't have that bulk data creation where we can recreate that margin over to 1,000 customers. Some of our partnerships are a little bit different, where we're having to basically resell data, and the margin, those margins are compressed greatly. So I don't have as much. So I'm more sensitive to the price on data at Craft than I was at D&B, just based on the business model of how we create data and the software modules are a Craft. And that's where you have a little bit more room to move on margin as opposed to potentially reselling data.
So you do take that cost into account.
Totally.
In order to know what that flexibility is. Is there sort of a threshold you typically set in your negotiation that says, hey, I'm going to make it painful after this point for the customer because it's really cutting into the bone here?
Yeah. Like I said, it's different now than it was previous.
Yeah.
I wasn't as concerned with margin when I was at D&B.
Yeah.
So as a sales guy, I don't want to use the term coin operated, but when I was selling at D&B, my method and my team, I was more concerned about how to optimize compensation for me and my team. And so when it got to a point that it was going to impact compensation greatly, then I made it really difficult on the customers. Less so now. Now it's more, I'm more concerned about the overall value of Craft. And so if it gets to 50% margin, okay, it's starting to get tight. So now I need to start looking at drawing a firmer line in the sand.
Got it. That makes sense.
That gave me another idea about something kind of tangential, but we've been talking for a long time, actually, this idea of having a value-based organization. I'm fully jumping topics, actually.
Yeah.
You're making me think, like, I don't know, it could be good. Maybe Jeet, you can share a little bit about how you think about this, and then we can see what this looks like for Brian and how they do this at Craft. Like, how do you feed information back to the product team? How does the sales team incorporate changing customer needs, all that good stuff?
Yeah.
That a bit?
Yeah. So one of the things that we talk to our clients about, Brian, is this notion of a value-based organization, a fully functional value-based organization. Because what we find is there are knowledge gaps. So as an example, a sales team with their marketing team or a product person will go to a customer site for a QBR. They go to the QBR, they present a great number of data points, things that they've done well, things that they should be improving upon, all these things. They have this great dialogue with their customer engagement team. They get some information back from them as well. And it gets into their notebooks, it gets into whatever, but it doesn't really get flooded throughout the organization because the goal of the QBRs is to update and then close and renew and things like that. As long as those metrics are popping, none of it really matters. And what we kind of talk about from a pricing lens is your competitors are changing, your products and services are changing, the market is changing, the end customer is changing. Then why are you not capturing the dynamic nature of everything that's going on in the market real time as you're asking the right questions, you capture the right information, and that information should be flowing back to your organization, to product development, to sales operations. If there's a problem at a customer site, other sales ops people should know about it so they can prepare for the questions that they may be able to get. So that ecosystem of understanding where and how you're creating value, where and how you're losing value, where competitors are coming in, all of that information being used at the right levels with the right people so it becomes actionable for you to do something about it. We see that very lacking, with a lot of our clients, and I'm curious to kind of get your perspective on it.
I mean, it's a challenge, no doubt. I think there's two things that are happening to potentially mitigate or compress some of that gap. You are always going to have silos. So you have silos in product, in engineering and go to market, marketing and finance, sales, and there's knowledge gaps. And you have knowledge gaps even within a sales organization. So if I've been here at 5 years and someone's been here 5 months, there's going to be a knowledge gap. And so how do you impose or push some of that knowledge to someone that's new? It's really hard. So Slack is one way that helps a little bit. So, giving product feedback or giving customer feedback, the marketing team should be incumbent on them to understand what's going on in the market, to talking to advisory firms, talking to the Gartners, Forresters, and pushing that down to the organization. That's one, but still there's knowledge gaps. The other piece that's changing a bit is AI transcription of notes. So you're having every sales call recorded, you're having every meeting recorded, and then you're having key takeaways from that meeting. And then we push those to the product team and engineering team so they can listen to them to see what customers and prospects are saying. So that bridges the gap a bit.
Yeah.
But now you're asking product people to listen to sales calls, and guess how often they do that? Never. So
anything else?
I don't think so. I really appreciate you doing this with us. It's great to spend some time with you, pick your brain a bit, and thank you.
It was my pleasure. I love the chat. Thanks for having me.
All right, talk soon. Thank
All
you.
right, thanks, guys.